What up guys, Joachim here of Joachim Speaks in Tongues, and this video is going to look at a little bit about DuoLingo and how far can you go in DuoLingo. This is kind of a common question that comes up in the forums that I see people asking, and I took a little bit of time to answer this one, and I thought I would go over it here on my YouTube channel as well. Because it's a good question, and it's highly dependent on which course that you are doing on DuoLingo and how many words, phrases, how much grammar is covered, and that kind of thing. Because the languages at DuoLingo are often made by volunteers, they're the major languages like Spanish, French, I think German, definitely English. If somebody's studying English, that's one of the big ones. I want to say Portuguese maybe might be one of the other kind of big ones. But those will go a lot further. Those are sponsored languages on DuoLingo. They have more features, like they have the stories built into it. So I've been recording the stories here on my YouTube channel that are on there, but those are, user-made stories, or the ones that I'm doing, they were translated by a user. They're not part of the DuoLingo app. So what language you choose or what language you're studying will depend a lot on how far the DuoLingo course goes. So for the Greek course, it actually goes pretty far because it has, I think, about 3,100 lexems, meaning like different variations of the word, like present tense, past tense. Those might be considered a different word. Or if you say like afto, like this, afti can mean she or this, aftos can mean he or this or it. And so you have these different versions of the same word. Afti can also mean they. So if it's spelled, it's spelled a little bit differently. So I don't want to get too into Greek specifically, but Greek is going to be the example that I use for this. So if you look at how far can you go on DuoLingo, or how far, how fluent will you be once you've completed it? Fluency, as I say in this post, can sometimes be difficult to quantify. And the CEFR, or Common European Framework of Reference system of gauging, where you're at in a language, is a very good and probably the best system that we currently have to look at your level of fluency. So these are based on words that you see down here. It says CEFR. And I'm trying to highlight it now so it's on the screen. CEFR, maybe it doesn't do that, I guess. So CEFR level, and then your active vocabulary and passive vocabulary. So active vocabulary is words that you can generate. So if you make a sentence or you say something, that's you using active vocabulary. The two primary forms of that would be both speaking and then writing or typing. So those would be kind of like output active vocabulary, whereas passive vocabulary, your passive vocabulary should approximately be about twice what your active vocabulary is. And you can see that's factored into these ranges that are given based on the CEFR. So A1, A2, those would be kind of beginner. You've got maybe 300 words of active vocabulary with 600 words of passive vocabulary. And then it kind of goes on down the list. You get to the intermediate phase, and this is B1, B2. So I mentioned 3,100 lexems. If we say that that's about, if it's 3,100, I don't know how the CEFR gauges those words, but I think probably lexems is a good way to go about it. So that meaning that if you are at the 3,000 phase, then your active vocabulary, if you know all of those 3,000 words from Greek that appear in the DuoLingo course, and you're able to output them, then you would be at least in your active vocabulary at the B2 phase. But if you've only done DuoLingo, then your passive vocabulary would also only be 2,500 words because they would be the same. So that's not really how it works. Once you finish the DuoLingo course, and if you've done all of the levels and things, which I don't necessarily recommend doing, but if that's what you've chosen to do, then you would be at this level where you can comprehend probably 3,100 or maybe 3,000 words. So you would probably be more in the B1 category, and then that means that you should also be able to generate or output at least 1,200 words, and that's probably more realistic. Once you finish Duolingo, it's not like you're going to be able to output every single word. You wouldn't be able to think of it. When you see it, you'll recognize it, and you'll be able to output it then, or to recognize it, I mean, to understand what it's being said. So the four parts of the CEFR system is reading, and listening, and comprehension. So like reading and listening comprehension, those being two different parts of, or two different ways of taking in information. Those are passive ways of understanding, whereas your active ability to output information through either speaking or writing/typing, that would fall into that other category. So you can see you get up to those advanced categories. And there's a Wikipedia article here that I think does a good job of covering what exactly it means to be one of those. I'm going to go to that now. If we go down, I think it gives a breakdown on this page for what these mean. So you can see from the description box here, they kind of give a rough estimate of what it means to be a user in one of these languages. So if you get to this B1, where I'm saying probably if you've completed the entire Duolingo course in Greek at least, because it has 3,000 lexemes used in it, then you should be approximately at this level. But now where you may not actually be at this level, though, is that Duolingo only ever gives single sentences. And so that doesn't really replicate very well the way that verbal language is understood. So you might have a difficult time following an entire conversation if you've only done Duolingo, because you haven't practiced the ability to follow an entire conversation, and that's really going to make it difficult for you to do that. But say that you while you're doing Duolingo, you also have been reading books, and you've been trying to understand these. You've been listening to podcasts or watching YouTube videos in the target language that you're learning, and then probably you would be closer at least to this if you're doing a language like Greek that has 3,000 or more words in it. So can understand the main points of clear standard input on familiar matters regularly encountered in work, school, leisure, etc. So that's one point. Can deal with most situations like to arise while traveling in an area where the language is spoken. Can produce simple, corrected text on topics that are familiar or of personal interest. And the last point they say for a B1 category learner is that you can describe experiences and events, dreams, hopes, and ambitions, and briefly give reasons and explanations for opinions and plans. Okay, so that's all things you do. You can see as you go down, you get to more difficult or higher output thresholds for what you can do with the language, and it becomes more complex. So of that, I say in the Duolingo article, based on this criteria, I would say Duolingo will bring you to near B1, which is, I've kind of already said that. I've kind of gone over this. The last sentence that I say in this, though, is probably relevant. It says, beyond that, to get to those more near native C1, C2 levels, you would need to have done thousands of hours of reading, listening, talking, and writing to get to that level. And to go with that last point, I think I clarify this here in the last part, and I say also when I think of fluency, and this is why I say thousands of hours, when I think of fluency, I think of it as being automatic. So the more that you go in the language, the easier it becomes to encounter it. You can listen to music for a few hours a day, and or just podcast or anything, and once you've started to grasp hold a lot of the language, then it becomes more easier each day to actually encounter the language in more ways. So say you listen to music while at work in the language that you're learning. Like when you're a beginner, that might be helpful, but it'll be a lot more helpful once you actually are understanding the words that are being said in the songs, because then it helps you develop fluency. Whereas when you're a beginner, you don't actually comprehend any of the words that you've been learning, unless you've actually taken that song and learned the lyrics to it and learned what was being said, then actually it probably is a great exercise. I recommend doing that. But as far as like being able to experience the language in a lot more ongoing, more pleasurable ways that are more entertaining and interesting for you, the further you go, the easier it is for you to encounter the language, because you can do it through music, through podcasts, through television, through maybe occasionally speaking if you can get language partners and things like that. So those all become easier actually as you go on, for you to spend more time in the language through just things that you would normally do in your daily life. But to that point, I say that's what I think of it as being automatic, is that fluency, the idea of fluency should accompany the idea of it being automatic, meaning that when you see or hear, and I give a phrase in Greek here, mu aresi na milao ελληνικά. So I like to speak Greek. If you're fluent in the language and you hear that sentence, then you don't really have to think about what it means. You don't have to translate it in your head. It's so ingrained into you, the meaning of the words, that even if you didn't want to understand it, it would still be comprehensible to you. You would still understand what's being said. And I say that's my own personal definition of fluency, though, and it doesn't take into account the number of words necessary. But basically, if you can do that with the most common 5,000 words and in its entirety, and it's entirely automatic, then you're pretty fluent. So, Duo has the ability to get you about 3/5 of the way there. So that's kind of my view of like how fluent you can get with DuoLingo. Generally, I think DuoLingo is a great way to get started in a language. I usually, in the other languages that I've learned, I've taken DuoLingo up through like 3 rounds on the entire course. And when it had you doing a lot of output in the language, I thought it was better to kind of move on and start to really begin to experience the language with a lot more reading. So that's why, like in the last video, I had made the bi-directional bilingual text and shown how I was doing that with the Bible and reading from that every day, where I read the Bible was on the left, and then the Bible also in English was on the right, but the left was the Greek portion. And I was doing it in modern Greek just for modern Greek practice, but the biblical Greek actually is not that different. But I don't want to go into Greek and sound the way like a Shakespearean English speaker would come. Like, I don't want to be coming unto my friends in the Greek churcheth to say things unto them that would be in a very unusualeth manner. So I guess that's why I would rather just do it in modern Greek right now, because I can always understand the biblical Greek even if I speak modern Greek. Whereas if you learn to hear a lot of biblical Greek, in that sense, you might sound a little unusual if you try to speak to modern Greek speakers. So that's it for today's videos. You guys take it easy, and I'll talk to you in another video coming very soon.